This is a lathe related project, but I think most of us that have a lathe probably do other woodworking. That's not just wood turning. And I do a little bit of everything. But one thing that's kept me from doing like cutting boards with handles and charcuterie boards is because I really never had a spindle sander. And I don't do enough of that type of work that requires a spindle sander or a disc sander to justify spending the money, and maybe even more importantly, taking up the floor space in my shop for a new tool, a new spindle sander by itself, or a new disc sander. So I thought I would take my lathe that I have, and for the few times that I need that type of a sander, I would just convert my lathe. I found on Amazon these PowerTech, and I'll probably put a picture there, PowerTech sanding sleeves. It's an 18-pack assortment. These are pretty tiny, so you'll see how I did these. I made the ones I made to mount in a chuck. If you made one that was this small, I think you would have to do it and bring your tailstock up to support it, because I don't think you'd be able to put much pressure on a piece of wood like that. But you might be able to find a piece of metal, a bolt or something that would fit this. I'm sure you could, and then you could put it in a chuck like this, and the smaller one would work too. But I don't think I need all of these sizes, so just know that they're available. All of these are available in the kit, and it wasn't that expensive. I'll put the price in the description that I got them on Amazon. I'm sure there's other brands that work just as fine. So I made all 3 grits, and then when I got done, I put the grits on there. So we've got 80, 120, and 240. So if you needed to use a spindle sander in your shop, you simply put this in your chuck. And I have the spigot jaws in for these. You could use a bigger piece of wood and use a bigger chuck, but you'd have to turn a lot of wood away. So I went ahead and used the spigot jaws for these. So now I have my sander right here. I have a spindle sander right here. And of course, if you wanted to change the grit, all you would have to do is just loosen this up, grab the next grit, put it in, you have the other grit. So I've got these for smaller, like to get in smaller holes. And then for maybe just the outside of boards or something that you want to smooth, if you want to use that option, I have these bigger ones. So I'm going to have to remove this chuck here real quick and get my other chuck jaws. Of course, you just make these to fit whatever chuck jaws that work for you. And so this will go in here, and we'll simply tighten this up. And now I have this bigger diameter wheel. You know, if I want to put a big board on here, the outside of a board, you know, inside radiuses to sand, I basically have a spindle sander available. And then I'll show you my disc sander option, and it works out pretty good too. So for the disc sander, I took a 2x6 and I screwed it or glued it. I think I glued it to this piece of plywood. It really doesn't matter. You just need enough material here to have a dovetail. So you probably don't need it this big, but you do need it probably 1.5 inches, okay? So I made this to where my bigger chuck jaws could go on the outside of this dovetail here. So I don't have to take, if I've got my bigger jaws on here and I want a sander real quick, I don't have to take my chuck off. So that would fit there. And then if I have my smaller jaws on, I went and did the inside dovetail so that I don't have to take this chuck off if that's the one that I have on right now. Okay, and so depending on which chuck you have, the smaller one, you would go on the inside and expand out into it. Okay. And if you had the bigger one, you would clamp down on it. Now, how did I do this? I just glued a 2x6 to a piece of plywood. You could use just a chunk of wood that was that big. And the first thing you would do is just mount your faceplate on there and just go ahead and screw that in. And then you want to make sure you watch out for your screws if your wood's not that big. So you don't need big screws. This isn't a big chunk of wood. Although you could make a bigger disc sander if you had bigger discs. So, you know, the sky's the limit on this too. I had these available. Got them free somewhere. I think my father-in-law gave them to me, so I made it to fit the size of these discs. So you would screw this on your chuck, and then you would turn the chunk of wood round so it fits your disc, okay? So whatever size disc you're using, turn it so that it fits your disc. And then I would put a dovetail for the outside and a dovetail for the inside, if you have two chucks, or just do whichever one works for the chuck you have. And then you can take your faceplate off, and then you can mount this in if you need to, and true it up if you need to anymore. But once you put your sanding disc on there, it is good to go, and you have a disc sander. Of course, here you can also, you know, you could make a platform. You could use this, or you could make yourself a platform that fits in your banjo. But this is a way to give you a disc sander and spindle sander, and you don't have to take up any more floor space. Really, all you have to do is find where you want to store these sanders, and I would write the grid on there. If you're like me, I probably will only use most of the time the 80 grit, but I probably will use the 120 some, and then for the 220, I might just hand sand, that type of thing. But I only have, for the disc sander, I only have, I think this was an 80 grit, or maybe it might be a 120. It doesn't quite feel, it's used, so I'll have to see. But I probably won't make, you could make multiple of these for each grits that you want to use. I probably, for a disc sander, I don't use a disc sander very often. For a disc sander, I probably will just keep this one grit, and I probably won't make any more. But maybe you have some other ideas of what you can use your lathe for other than spindle and disc sander. And I'd be curious if you have some other ideas that might be useful to us wood turners that also do other types of woodworking. And you can keep watching the video if you want to see how I made these. I'll demonstrate exactly how I made these and show you some little tips and techniques on how to get them to fit just right so that they're not too tight but not too loose. So for this project, you don't need perfect wood. So this has a big knot. I'm not going to use it for anything else. So it's going to work out good for this type of project. And I'm just using a roughing gouge here to make this stock round. You just want to keep that roughing gouge moving, and I keep reminding you, don't make some big coves. Here I'm putting the sanding disc on there, and I'm marking, leaving some space here. That space there will be how deep I want the dovetail to be so that the chuck can grab onto these discs. And then the other little line is just kind of a parting tool width to know that I'm going to be parting that off. So here I am using a parting tool to make that dovetail. And here I'm using a bigger parting tool to fine tune the dovetail. And I'm going to use my calipers here. I've got them set to the distance I want that matches my chuck jaws to make sure I have that just right. And I'm parting this off all the way till it's about a ½ inch or so of wood. And then I just grab this Japanese pull saw and I just kind of cut all the way around so that it's nice and flush against the end of the dovetail there. And then I'll just take it out of the tailstock and I'll finish cutting these sections off. There's a little bit there that's not flush, but it doesn't matter because that will not hit the chuck jaws. So this does not have to be perfect. This project does not have to be perfect. Now we're to the process to get this to fit perfectly with your sandpaper sleeve. And you just push it up there, it's a little snug, and then just creep up on it with whatever tool you like to use. This is a good time to practice. I'm using a roughing gouge here. You can use a spindle gouge, you could use a skew chisel, whatever, but be careful here, take your time. Here I shove this on too much. So I put too much force, and then I had a little bit of a hard time getting this back off. So don't make my mistake and shove this on with too much pressure. If it's snug, just take it back off and just take a little bit off. You can even use sandpaper. Here I'm just going to take a little bit off with this roughing gouge because that's the tool I had. You can tell I'm making very fine peeling cuts there. I'm not really worried about tear out because this project, we don't really care about tear out. It's going to be covered up with the sandpaper. And here I believe I'm going to take just a little bit too much off. And you're going to see that this sandpaper sleeve is a little loose. Don't worry, you can fix this really easy with some painter's tape or some masking tape. This is a nice little trick that you can use for a lot of your turning projects. Just add this, and if you needed to add another, you could wrap this around twice if you needed to add the thickness of the tape to make this nice and snug. This is just an easy solution. Don't stress about it if you take too much off. And now it's just perfect. So that's a nice little technique. It's going to make that fit good. And there's all three of the sleeves done, and just showing how quick and easy you can switch grits with these. Now for the smaller sleeves, I had to put the spigot jaws on because I didn't want to remove a bunch of material. And I'm using a rod from a hammock swing that I got off of Amazon, and it was bowed, so that's why this is kind of wobbly. It was bowed, but it's free material, and it's about the right size for this sleeve, so always liking to use up product. I'm one of those woodworkers that has a scrap pile that just continues to grow, that I should probably use a lot of it for fires and kindling, but I always think that someday I'll have a project for that little piece of wood, and today I was successful in finding a project for this old rod. Here you can see I put the roughing gouge away and decided to grab the skew chisel. It's always good for me to do a little practice with the skew chisel. It's probably one of the last tools that I learned how to use, and to be honest, I still can learn a lot on the skew chisel. So a lot of times I'll grab the skew chisel just to practice. In this case, the sleeve almost fit. I just need a little bit of wood taken off. So instead of using the skew chisel more, I just decided to sand a little bit of material off. I knew that it would be enough to let this fit just perfect. And there you go. That's how I made the sleeves. Hope this was helpful. Please subscribe.